I've seen this video in my recommendation a few times. Japan in 1960 was insane. I'll watch that. I've seen it in my recommendation for a while. I'll watch it. By Spectacles.
Received this afternoon.
I speak of the old Japan because out of the ashes of the old Japan, there has risen a new Japan. Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, 1951.
A message from the Japanese government. I deem this reply the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Is it
There's this
MacArthur
moment
talking?
after World War II where the world is suddenly changing really quickly and Japan is being completely remade. Because armed with an unconditional surrender and the atomic bomb, America could do anything to Japan. But when soldiers under General Douglas MacArthur entered Tokyo, their assignment wasn't to punish the country that had just started.
I was gonna say, I'd read a bit about this, and, you know, MacArthur is a bit of a fuck-up in terms of, like, military battle and stuff like that. But what he did with Japan was pretty good, you know, like, I wouldn't be surprising that, you know, after everything Japan had done in World War II, America would be really harsh on them. But MacArthur, like, took an approach of, like, literally trying to, like, modernize Japan. He didn't, for example, like, punish Hirohito the emperor and, like, left him as a figure to kind of, like, lead the new country and win acceptance. He made the troops treat the people well and try to rebuild and all that. So I can say respect for that.
A war that killed 30 million people. Instead, their task was to rebuild Japan, and more importantly, to transform it into a peaceful democratic nation.
Pretty well done, I would say, I mean.
And today, that's what Japan has become, a democratic country famous for its technology and innovation, and for its peacefulness. But this American transformation didn't happen overnight, and its success was far from guaranteed.
Revolt.
There was a time when anything was possible, a time when leading politicians declared friendship with communists and swore opposition to America, when massive crowds dominated the streets of Tokyo, storming parliament, attacking American officials, and chanting, "Yankee, go home," when many believed Japan was on the verge of a socialist revolution. That is until this wave of resistance hit its final.
I guess I never realized, but yeah, that makes sense. You know, we see all I know of these stories that, like, America occupied Japan and they did one hell of a job to, you know, win over the population and help the country rebuild and evolve. But I guess, of course, there would be quite a bit of, like, resentment by some people, and it would take a lot. There's a manga by Tsutomu Takahashi, I think. I really like this artist. He grew up after World War II, and one of his manga is Tetsuwan Girl, I believe. It's about, like, a businessman who lost everything after World War II, and some girl who lost everything, and they're starting, like, the first female Japan baseball team. And that's kind of, like, the main plot, but there's a lot about, like, you know, the kind of, like, feelings of the defeated Japanese after World War II. It's a great manga, Tetsuwan Girl. I recommend it. And his art style is awesome. And yeah, that one was pretty interesting because, you know, the author himself lived after that. And so, you know, there was a lot of feeling, like, in the way he wrote the stories, you know.
Crescendo, when in 1 year, 3 enormous events combined to set Japan on the path to becoming the country we know today. First, a new treaty with America.
Okay.
Then, the largest protest in the country's modern history. And finally, a brutal samurai sword assassination televised for the entire country to witness. But these 3 events don't just explain why Japan is the way it is today, because this story actually helps explain a fundamental truth about why every society is the way it is.
Okay.
This is Japan 1960, the year that made a nation. This is the year of blood.
Never heard about any big event in 60. We must restore security, dignity, and self-respect to a warrior nation which has suffered an unending defeat. MacArthur in 45. Yeah, that's why it's pretty insane, right? Like, obviously the atomic bomb forced people to surrender, but, you know, with a nation like Japan, with the amount of pride and probably the humiliation of the defeat, it's insane that they were able to do it, you know, like that there wasn't more revolt, more resentment, more, like, atrocities and brutal crackdown. It's surprising that it just works so well, you know. But I guess there might be some appeal.
The American occupation of Japan began with nearly boundless idealism. Immediately, the political and military leaders responsible for the conflict were arrested, many charged with war crimes, while the emperor was forced to renounce his divinity and endorse a shockingly progressive constitution. This new founding document established Japan as a liberal democracy, of course, but it went further, guaranteeing equality between men and women and enshrining the rights of workers to unionize and self-advocate, measures absent even from America's own constitution.
Okay.
At the same time...
So they were testing the water in advance? Alright. Okay. Just testing how it works in a different country to be a bit more progressive.
Large farms were divided and redistributed, and massive monopolistic corporations were slated to be broken up. Old, hierarchical Japan...
I don't know if they ever tried that in America, though. I don't think they liked it very much.
...was quickly giving way to a new, democratic Japan. But perhaps the biggest break from the past was the Constitution's Article 9. The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right. Land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. These were massive, controversial social changes, but despite some discontent, Japan's path to democratic modernity seemed clear, until one day, everything changed.
It is one hell of a clause when you think about it. As I often say, like I've watched a lot of videos about the Napoleonic War, for example, or even like World War I, and you know, all of the country that participated and the losers, they still are allowed to keep an army, right? Like I think after World War I, Germany, for example, were like literally told to be like the one guilty for the war, even though like there was a donation in it. Even Germany was allowed to have like, I forget, like 150,000 men as an army or something. So it's crazy to put a clause of like, you have no right to have an army anymore to Japan. Though obviously we know by now, after all this time, they've been rearming themselves recently. But yeah.
In Russia, you've seen why we are spending billions of dollars in defense production.
Communism was spreading, and suddenly America was no longer basking in the post-war glow of victory. A new war was on, the Cold War. Idealism vanished. Instead of a progressive democracy, Washington now needed a forward military base with a stable, friendly government. Most of the war-era leaders, experienced and reliably anti-communist, were suddenly pardoned and allowed to seek political office. Few renounced their wartime actions. Instead, communists were now purged from the government, and many progressive policies favoring organized labor and the breakup of monopolies were abandoned, even reversed. Article 9 remained in force, but America did allow the formation of a small pseudo-military, the Japan Self-Defense Force. What came next, however, was downright humiliating. As a condition of the occupation's end, America proposed a treaty. It stipulated the American military could freely station and move troops throughout Japan, without being under any obligation to defend the country in the event of an attack, and the treaty had no expiration date. Japan had no choice but to accept. So by the time the American occupation ended in 1952, a lot of the early progress made restoring security, dignity, and self-respect to a new democratic Japan had been undone. This security treaty was humiliating, and it caused a serious identity crisis, as Japan was torn between that initial post-war optimism and a new Cold War pessimism, where nothing mattered except stability and anti-communism. A contest...
Like again, I feel like, America should have learned at that point from what happened with Germany in World War I. Like one of the biggest reasons Hitler rose is, he was really selling the idea of how it was so unfair, all the things that were imposed on Germany after World War I, when they weren't the only one in the war, they weren't the only one that started the war and stuff like that. And, some of it is obviously true, some of it isn't. But again, it was really like a good thing to sell to the people. So I guess, like they probably don't want Japan to have the same thing, like if they left them on their own accord, they were beaten. So like America is like right here, and they're like, yeah, like if we leave them to their own device, that animosity might build, like we lost so much, it was so unfair and all that, and it must start another war eventually. So I understand why at first they were trying to like, really go with like kid glove on, what they were doing in Japan, but then communism, I guess, and I guess America forgets about a lot of things when it comes to communism. It's kind of the thing that happens a lot.
Over the fundamental question of what kind of nation Japan was going to be.
Before we go any further, I just want to take a second to thank a great...
Wait, I couldn't read. Bloodshed, riots mark May Day in Tokyo as communist-led hordes battle police in violent anti-foreign demonstration. Okay.
Before we go any further, I just want to take a second to thank a great friend of the channel and the sponsor of this video, AnyDesk. Because without partners like AnyDesk, we couldn't make these videos. AnyDesk is an incredible program that lets you control and access any of your devices from anywhere in the world at any time. Honestly, it's kind of magical being able to control my desktop from the other side of the world in just 2 clicks. Once you're connected, AnyDesk is great at retrieving files, as I've been doing a lot lately, printing remotely, working from home, or helping family members.
Can it boot your computer from the other side of the world, or do you have to have it on? That's the question. Like just going on a long vacation somewhere, but you have to leave your PC on.
Troubleshoot technical issues. Luckily, it's as easy to set up as it is to use. Just download, type in the access code, and you're in.
Yeah.
Easy as can be. Sound too good to be true? Well, try it for yourself at anydesk.com/spectacles. And because it's totally free for personal use, checking it out is a great way to support the channel without spending a dime. You'll be glad you did, and so will we.
Okay.
That's anydesk.com/spectacles. Thank you, AnyDesk. So, Japan is gripped by an identity crisis. 2 images show who was winning this fight by 1960 in the Diet, Japan's parliament. This shows how many seats each party controlled after the 1955 election. These are the 2 biggest parties, the Liberals and Democrats. They're both conservative, and they're totally dominant. But here's the Diet after the next election. The 2 biggest parties are just gone. Except they're really just hiding, because this is the Liberal Democratic Party, a sort of conservative super party formed in a merger that was actually...
I just get confused a little bit. When I see red, I'm thinking like, damn, communism.
Organized in part by the CIA, who wanted Japan's anti-communist parties to join forces. Heading up the new party was this guy, Nobusuke Kishi, a war criminal and former minister in the wartime government. By 1957, he was prime minister, and he had 2 core goals. First, revise the Constitution, eliminate Article 9, and remilitarize Japan. And second, renegotiate the humiliating security treaty with America. Now, treaty renegotiation was widely popular in Japan, not just with the right wing. So when Kishi, after 3 years of haggling with the American government, secured key concessions, mandated consultation with the Japanese government about American troop movements, a defense commitment from America for Japan, and a 10-year term of treaty renewal rather than it being indefinite,
I'm surprised he got them to agree on that.
He hailed as a hero.
But there were 2 problems. While treaty renegotiation was widely popular, revising the Constitution was anything but. Most Japanese wanted nothing to do with war, and eliminating Article 9 to remilitarize the country threatened a return to those dark days. Moreover, Kishi wasn't a hero. He was a horrible man who had helped steer Japan into a devastating war from which he massively profited, while the rest of the country suffered.
Good that people don't forget, because people often forget it. Good, huh?
He was also just elitist, arrogant, and corrupt. He openly disdained the media and the Japanese public as beneath him and centralized power in an inner circle of allies.
And he expects to be popular.
Under Kishi, many feared a comeback of the old Japan. As a result, he'd galvanized not only the left, but a wide swath of Japanese society against him. And when he attempted to force through legislation expanding police powers to stifle this widespread public dissent, protesters took to the streets and forced him to back down. By January of 1960, even though he'd seriously improved the treaty terms, nobody trusted him, and mass resistance...
That's surprising. I feel like in a lot of country, people would definitely be of the mind of like overlooking it, right? Like, might be a piece of shit, might be a war criminal, but I guess he got us a good deal, so, you know, let's support that. You know, it's like, what's the word for it? Like, overlook the bad for the greater good or something. But no, they didn't. They were like, no, like, we don't want you. That's awesome.
Guaranteed. Instead of calming things down, Kishi had fired the country up. The fight for Japan's future was getting uglier. But Kishi didn't care. He wanted to get the job done. Still, months of massive protests unnerved some LDP legislators, so he delayed the vote on the treaty until May 19th, the last day of the Diet's session. But even then, Kishi couldn't be sure he'd get his way. He needed more time, so he moved to extend the session, but the opposition saw it coming, and they blockaded the halls of the Diet, barricading the speaker in his office. Here was an unprecedented confrontation between the two sides of the core identity crisis facing Japan, and millions of Japanese across the country were watching it unfold on their television sets. For hours, it dragged on, until finally Kishi called police into the Diet, an unprecedented move, and had the officers physically carry the opposition members one by one, some literally kicking and screaming out of the building. Then, mere minutes before the session expired at midnight, a mass of officers assembled and forced the speaker through the remaining crowd and up to the rostrum. A 50-day extension was carried. But to everyone's shock, with only his own party present in the chamber, Kishi went further. He called an immediate vote on the treaty. It passed unanimously.
That's insane. I mean, he's going full dictator in like 2 seconds. I mean, I'm sure there's like some logic to it, but motherfucker is a war criminal, and they just like the US just were like, okay, that's fine. Like, anyone, you know, with the title war criminal, shouldn't they just be like prison for the rest of their life or executed or whatever it is? And this guy, not only like they were like, sure, you're fine, but like he was able to like get to this point, like, you know, being a politician and get to this point where he's like literally controlling the police to do whatever he wants. That's insane. Especially after already what happened with Japan, right? Like how could anyone let this happen? If we accept the event of May 1920, that the government is omnipotent, then we cannot also accept democracy. Professor Masao Murayama, 1960. And this is really interesting.
That core conflict over Japan's identity was heating up, moving from the ballot box to boxing bouts, as both major parties resorted to force to either obstruct or jam through a political agenda. Kishi won this round, but the treaty's opponents weren't finished. In their view, Kishi had made it clear he'd stop at nothing to get his way, and maybe they should do the same. Crucially for the opposition, the Diet is bicameral. While the lower house voted on May 20th, Japan's upper house still had a say in the matter. They couldn't reject the treaty outright, but they could delay the bill until the next election, when a new lower house might reconsider. If the upper house didn't intervene, however, the treaty would automatically ratify in 30 days, on June 19th. Coincidentally, the very day President Eisenhower was scheduled to make the first U.S. presidential visit to Japan. Convenient timing for a victory lap for Kishi. But hardly anybody in Japan wanted to grant him the satisfaction. Soon, hordes of citizens took to the streets every day, featuring a major protest somewhere in the country. The energy had transcended partisan politics to encompass a majority of the population. These weren't just student radicals or urban laborers, they were office workers and housewives. Even a number of conservatives, fed up with Kishi's suicidal politics, began funneling money from Japan's business establishment to left-wing groups organizing the protests. Still, the Diet's upper house wasn't budging yet, but the whole exercise was turning into a real problem for Kishi until on June 10th, just over a week before the treaty was slated to ratify, it got a whole lot worse. Ahead of his arrival, Eisenhower sent his press secretary, Jim Hagerty. But on the way from the airport to meet Kishi, Hagerty's car was assaulted by protesters who surrounded the vehicle, cracked the windows, and caved in.
I would say, like, what do they have to do with this? But again, he said earlier that the American pardoned the war criminal, and thanks to that, now he's at that point, you know, fucking up the country. So I get it.
the roof, all while shouting anti-American slogans. Eisenhower's security, and by extension the viability of his visit, was called into question. A massive embarrassment for Kishi and a coup for the protesters. It was a small victory, though, because time was running out. The protesters had staged massive demonstrations, unprecedented strikes, even intimidated the President of the United States. Yet still, the country was hurtling toward the ratification date without a hint of delay from the Diet. It was now or never.
I mean, it's fucked up to say, but yeah, literally, like, yeah. Like, I don't know if they were mostly peaceful protests, but I mean, you're not gonna stop the guy, like, you know, he's like in his long little world, like, of the politics with, you know, police force to protect him, so he just can ignore all the protests going on and do whatever he wants. So, like, if you really want to stop him, like, just... I don't know if it's a good thing to say, but, like, clearly peaceful protest isn't working, because, yeah, like, as long as it's peaceful, the guy is gonna be like, yeah, whatever, I can still do whatever I want.
They needed to do something big. On June 15th, 1960, tens of thousands of Japanese gathered before the Diet building. They were faced by 5,000 police officers. At first, the protests were non-violent. One group even managed to break into the Diet compound, where they peacefully occupied a garden, sang songs, and gave speeches. Elsewhere in the vicinity, though, a cohort of right-wing counter-protesters assaulted the demonstrators using planks driven through with nails. A melee ensued. Now things were completely out of hand. The police, who'd been instructed to exercise restraint, now decided the time for such things was over. They attempted to force the protesters out of the Diet compound, beating many of them unconscious. Blood began to run, instigating a mass panic. In the crowd crush that followed, Michiko Kanba, a female student at Tokyo University, was trampled to death.
Yeah. Only one fatality, I'd be surprised.
By midnight, Kishi had given police full authority to clear the building out, but out here, the protest, inflamed by Michiko's death, raged on. Kishi contemplated calling in self-defense force troops, but his cabinet talked him down. Instead, he announced he would resign within the month. Eisenhower canceled his visit.
Just like
it would be another 15 years before a sitting U.S. president first set foot in Japan. Still, protests continued to rock the country,
actually decided to resign
on June 18th, one day before the treaty's automatic ratification deadline. As one student protester put it, despite U.S. approval of the new treaty, I felt certain that the revision would fail in the face of such widespread opposition, a conviction shared by the adults around me. However, the upper house remained silent. And
it's really so telling. I mean, it's like that these days as well, right? Like, you know, even if some people sometimes try to sell you that your country is democratic, and sure, it may be more democratic in some way than others, you know, the best way to tell is like when there's massive protests, literally like, you know, huge part of the country doing massive protests against something, and that the government and the leaders are just ignoring it because they don't care, because it's peaceful. That's when you know, yeah, like, does it really matter? Like, is this really a true democracy? Like, they're not even trying to listen to the people. People are going as far as to go into the street protesting, like millions sometimes. You know, and the second you see them like trying to ignore it, like at that point, yeah, you know, things aren't going how they're supposed to go.
18th, the treaty was ratified.
It's basically like a bunch of politicians, like, you know, an insanely small minority being like, no, we have, you know, we have the right opinion, and you millions in the street don't, so we're gonna decide. We're not gonna listen to you. Even now, we all still have vivid recollection of you giving all the speeches in every corner of his nation. Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda, 1960. Okay.
In one sense, the Japanese left and the broader protest movement had failed. It was a critical victory for the conservative side of Japan's identity crisis. The treaty was ratified, and the country had taken a clear step toward U.S. alignment, which was more or less legally locked in until the treaty was due for renewal in 10 years. But in another sense, the opposition had scored a major victory. Eisenhower...
Like, obviously, I'm not saying, like, you know, I'm not fully siding with one side or the other. Like, some of this treaty made some sense, but, you know, looking at the bigger picture and all that.
Backed out, and Kishi resigned, proving that two could play political hardball. In turn, neither had this episode truly settled the fundamental question about what kind of nation Japan would become. If anything, the choice in the upcoming elections seemed more polarized than ever, as the Socialist Party leader Inejiro Asanuma visited the Chinese Communists, still not recognized by Japan as the official government, where he treated with party chairman Mao Zedong, gave speeches declaring his friendship with China and opposition to America, and returned to Japan wearing Mao's signature outfit. Asanuma wasn't just a radical. He was popular. Famous for his shabby dress and for living in public housing his whole life, Asanuma connected with the public about as well as Kishi repulsed it. By contrast, if a Mao suit and shabby clothes defined Asanuma's radicalism and appeal, wire-rimmed glasses and double-breasted suits defined the LDP's new leader, Kishi's Minister for International Trade and Industry, Hayato Ikeda. This was the uniform of a graduate of an elite school, an economist, and a finance minister. Hardly the look of a man destined to repair the party's elitist reputation. But it wasn't just Ikeda's clothing that seemed to doom his odds. Indeed, his party had chosen him because he was thought to be an empty shirt, someone with no real base of support within the party who could stand in until the impending election determined the better man for the job. After all, Ikeda's career was littered with political missteps. Back in 1950, he'd infamously suggested that Japan's poor should cope with high food costs by eating more cheap barley and less expensive rice, prompting comparisons to Marie Antoinette. Worse still, Ikeda had been trade and industry minister once.
People don't learn from history, I mean. Yeah. People never learn, right? I mean, even back in the day, right? There was stuff like that. I remember watching a video about like the 1848 revolutions. You know, like Marie Antoinette was 40 to 50 years ago at that point. And there was still like some French, I think it was a minister of police or something. I think François Guizot was the name, who said some shit about, you know, like, you know, basically like a ton of people were complaining that only the rich can vote. And he literally said something like, then just get rich, you know? Like, it's crazy how many people, people in power throughout history, like, have this kind of mindset, you know? It's the same today. It's the same today. Even if, like, they don't have a misstep or saying something that egregious, you know, they think like that. It's insane.
Before in 1952, but had lasted less than a month after he was quoted in the press, remarking coldly, "Even if 5 or 10 small businessmen commit suicide, it can't be helped." Asanuma, the everyman, couldn't have asked for a better opponent. But he had more than Ikeda to contend with. On October 12, 1960, Inejiro Asanuma stood on stage for a debate inside this building in Tokyo, with Ikeda seated a few feet away in the front row. Millions were watching on TV when suddenly a man rushed on stage and seemed to collide with Asanuma. He wielded a wakizashi.
Oh, I think I've seen this clip before, yeah. I have no idea where, but I believe I've probably seen this clip before.
A kind of short sword, and as he lunged at Asanuma a second time, he was tackled to the ground, but it was too late. The assailant's first strike had been a deep blow through the ribs. Asanuma died within minutes.
You'd have think the other guy would have been killed, but also some people were like so against communism that this guy is in his target.
It was Japan's first political assassination since the war. The killer was a 17-year-old right-wing radical who would hang himself in jail a few weeks later after scrawling, "Long live the Emperor," on his cell wall in toothpaste.
Most believed the murder would buoy support for the socialists, both for reasons of sympathy and because it reinforced the fear which spread under Kishi's leadership, that behind the LDP, in the shadow of Japan's right wing, lurked violence and terror. However, just days after Asanuma's death, Ikeda stood before the Diet to give a speech, where many expected characteristically direct and concise remarks, where Kishi might have even made a campaign speech. Ikeda shocked his colleagues by delivering an impassioned eulogy for Asanuma, reciting the lyrics from one of his 1920s campaign songs and commending his colleagues' commitment to the public good. His words left many in tears. But this wasn't just a one-off performance. The storming of the Diet had been traumatic. The death of a protester, tragic. But seeing a colleague stabbed to death mere feet away, That changed Ikeda. Gone were the wire-rimmed glasses and double-breasted jackets. He adopted chunky plastic frames and simple suits. The clothes of a man who no longer considered himself above.
Is it true though, once again, like, did he just tone down the vibe because he was afraid for his life, or did he genuinely have a change of heart? I mean, that is the biggest question. I guess his action will show that.
The people. Nor was Ikeda's transformation limited to a new outfit. He now fully grasped the gravity of Japan's political chaos. He saw how Kishi's confrontational winner-take-all politics had taken his country to a very dark place. Politics was too existential, too polarized, too violent. In his campaign, Ikeda sought to bring himself closer to the people, touring the country to discuss food prices, unemployment, and other kitchen table issues, promising, if elected, to double Japan's national income within a decade and to abstain from the golf and lavish geisha parties so beloved by his predecessor.
It worked. In the 1960 election, the LDP gained a number of seats as Japan's left wing shrank. More importantly, Ikeda kept his word. While in office, he never did play golf, nor was he seen at any parties. He attended studiously to governance, and though he died of...
I love how, I mean, these days probably less true, you can just go play golf, you know. Like there's some course where, you know, it's probably not that expensive, but golf really is like, it has that, that vibe of being like such a rich man's sport, you know, like the kind that looks down on people and tell them, yeah, like, go eat cake. That's literally the vibe, yeah. It's funny, that's such a big thing.
Answer before his promise to the nation could be realized, Ikeda's policies doubled Japan's national income in just 7 years.
Then.
But his most lasting legacy was his abandonment of the LDP's platform of constitutional revision. Article 9 would stay. Japan would not remilitarize. But not everyone celebrated Ikeda's achievements. Kishi, for one, lamented the move away from constitutional revision, while many LDP members decried his administration in general as do-nothing, a critique Ikeda seemed to embrace. As his close confidant and future Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa recalled, the issue was not what policies should be followed, but how policies should be decided in the Diet. And this issue was not really a joking matter. In America or Britain, this how has been decided as the result of a long history and centuries of tradition. It might take Japan many more years to get to that point. Ikeda's attitude was that...
I guess, yeah, that's kind of the idea, right? Like, you know, Japan, by the time of World War II, was like a very specific way. And then after that, you know, with America and all everything that happened, they're trying to like almost speed runs, I don't know, decades to maybe hundreds of years of like what would be a more natural course to go to like a more democratic government and country. So yeah, they're really trying to speed run it. So it would be pretty complicated for like any other people at the time what to try to make that happen, you know?
In order to promote the healthy development of parliamentary democracy, the Conservative Party, but also the progressive parties as well, should exercise a bit more self-control. By nature, the younger the democracy, the more difficult and delicate this exercise of democratic leadership.
Sure. Makes sense. Our basic policy is that the kind of disregard for law and order that prevailed during the Ampo protest never be allowed to reoccur. National Police Agency document.
Ikeda didn't just moderate the LDP, he moderated Japan. By abandoning his party's more divisive and extreme policies, he diffused the most potent criticisms from Japan's left, resulting in a political system which the LDP has more or less dominated ever since. These highly stable politics have
Which I did see a video of stream at some point about, you know, like how kind of broken and stuck and just inefficient Japan's government have been because of how little change there has really been for such a long time now. So I guess at that time it was a good thing. You know, we know Japan does insanely well after that, up to like the crazy 80s, right? Where everybody gets rich. But yeah, since then it's kind of been going downhill, so it's time to shake things up again.
benefits, encouraging Japan's meteoric economic growth during the 1970s and 80s, while Ikeda helped institute a less winner-take-all, more consultative legislative culture in the Diet, but it has brought downsides as well.
Yeah.
Political choice in Japan is very limited. Police regulations have rendered large-scale protests a nearly extinct form of political speech.
That's one thing I was gonna say earlier, like, you never hear about big protests in Japan these days. So I was pretty shocked by the one earlier, yeah. That's probably why. It really would take something massive for people to be willing to break the law and do a massive protest. I don't know what it would take.
And economic successes have given way to near paralyzing stagnation. In one sense, this story is ultimately about one simple trade-off that defines practically every political question. This is a spectrum of political possibility.
Okay.
At the far left is chaos. Think of war, revolutions, even anarchy. There's no telling what politics might look like in a year, a week, even a day. The horizons of political possibility are wide, even boundless, but the cost of such opportunity is ever-present instability and the threat of violence. At the other end is autocracy. Politics is stable, consistent, and reliable. Society is largely static. When it's good, it's great. But when it isn't, there's little that can be done.
It's rarely very good.
Most regimes fall somewhere on this spectrum, trading between the benefits of opportunity and stability. Of course, some regimes, like Putin's Russia, have the worst of both worlds, extremely narrow political horizons and an unpredictable, ever-present threat of violence meted out by a capricious dictator. But the spectrum is useful because it articulates this principle: that to gain in either opportunity or stability requires some sacrifice in the other.
Nothing is perfect.
A political system can't afford boundless opportunity and reliable stability and safety. Liberal democracy, as a regime, attempts to straddle the difference, providing democratic means to increase political choice and possibilities, while at the same time constraining that choice within inviolable principles of individual rights, increasing stability. Where exactly each nation sits varies, because every society, particularly its leaders, must make this choice in formative moments.
No country is quite the same.
For Japan, 1960 was that formative moment. And with the support of most Japanese, Ikeda made a choice. Faced with the horrors of pre-war fascist chaos, the devastation of a suicidal nationalist war, and the resurgence of domestic political instability and conflict, Japan chose stability. Japan chose economic prosperity, and in turn, Japan chose narrow political horizons, a system governed largely by one party, where political disputes are resolved quietly in backroom deals, rather than in public brawls and polarized.
And on one side, you might say, yeah, I guess that's a good thing. You know, obviously I've seen some videos about the current political situation and a lot of the problem with the social issues. I mean, I literally just saw an insane post on Reddit yesterday about how it came out that some University of Tokyo or something, medical university or school, that for a long time there was some system where they would basically always try to deduct points for female students or applicants or whatever it is. So they would always be below the guys as some kind of like old misogynistic view on things. And it was exposed recently or something. You know, again, there's a lot of problem, you know, in the society. But when you think about it, yeah, like if you want more freedom of, you know, of everything, you know, like for like potential chance and all that, it's gonna lead to a lot more like, I mean, to current America situation, right? Like, you know, it's pretty extreme what's going on in America. And on one side, you know, you can look at it and say, even though it's very scary, very extreme, at least the people really get to choose and have option, maybe. But on the other side, you can look at it and say, this is madness. I'd rather have a system like Japan where, like, while there's so many problems and no serious chance, there's never much, like, you know, big fear to constantly be fearing of, like, you know, political madness from, like, assassination attempt to massive protest to all that kind of stuff. I don't know how I feel about it, you know. Like, obviously I live in France myself. Um, you know, we have massive process all the time. It's kind of a meme, right? Um, Sometime it changes things, sometime not. Um, and we have a government that, you know, personally, I feel like I've never really been satisfied with. But maybe it's because like I've always been around like when I was growing up or even now, like literally anyone I ever see or talk to and they mention politics or the president are gonna say like it's trash, it's you know, is a piece of shit, it's terrible and all that. Um, but at the same time, yeah, we definitely have like more freedom for things to change, maybe, than a country like Japan. But you know, it can get a bit scary at time. Um, you know, especially because how extreme people's like opposite view get, and because they know that with our system and the big progress and everything, that you know, the more extreme you are, the more you might have a chance to like be heard or something, or that's what they think. Um, so yeah, I don't think there's a good middle ground. Like frankly, when I think about it, you know, it's probably impossible to reach like a good middle ground, as he kind of explained to an extent. I don't know. Like it's way too idealistic to reach a good middle ground. So in one sense, you might say, yeah, Japan has a lot of problem, and it'd be nice if they could evolve some of the government stuff to do better. But then if they did, it might lead to a lot of other problem, violence, more hatred of like different political view. I don't know. It's a mess. I really usually don't like talking about politics because I don't know a lot. Like I get confused sometimes about just like the names, like liberal democracy versus autocracy versus this and that. Like I know some of the meaning here and there, but I get very easily confused. I've never been one really into politics, right? Um, you know, I've been learning more about it over the last few years, but still. So yeah, in the end, my take is that I don't think there's any like possible perfect system. Um, you know, like communism was sold, for example, as like a perfect system, but we've seen what it does in so many countries. Even China today, like China is doing somewhat okay in some ways, and frankly, they're not doing like real communism at this point. They're doing like some kind of mix of things. Um, I don't know. Like, there's no perfect system. That's just the way it is. Um, every country has some problems. Like, is there any country that's kind of doing perfectly? I know some like small country, like maybe Netherlands or something. There might be one around there, you know, that for the most part everybody is happy. For the most part, but yeah, for most like bigger country, you know, I don't think you'd ever reach a point where everything is good, everybody is happy. I don't think that will ever happen. Yeah.
Elections.
In many ways, Japan is less democratic for its choice, less responsive to the needs and demands of its people, and less tolerant of public dissent. However, it remains fundamentally a democratic society. At what point that trade-off between stability and opportunity, between safety and freedom, becomes unacceptable? It's a difficult question, indeed.
Yeah. This is really some food for thought. Huh? Like again, when I think about it, you know, like I really don't like this idea that they can't protest, like that they're really banning mass gatherings, like people can't actually go into the street protesting. Because, you know, having literally sometimes like hundreds of thousands to millions of people in the street, peaceful, hopefully, like is a much bigger showcase of whatever opinion or opposition people might have against whatever the government's trying to push. So like banning that really, you know, like shuts down any obvious like kind of impact of the opposition, you know? Like even if people on some online polls say, you know, we are against this, it's just a bunch of numbers on an online poll, which feels probably to any politician who doesn't care super insignificant compared to having millions of people in the street. So yeah, I get the point. It's super dangerous to have anything like that. There's a possibility for so much disaster and people to die. There's a possibility for it to escalate to violence. We've had that in France many times. But I think there's no better way. Well, it's a, you know, as long as it stays peaceful, but it's a great way to really show how much people care about something. Because again, like if in Japan the only way people can protest is by like some social media post or maybe some votes about like, you know, approval. I remember seeing not long ago that like whatever prime minister had like 20 or 30% approval max. But clearly it doesn't matter, right? Like people are just saying, I don't approve. That's all they can do. And that's about it. But imagine a peaceful protest with millions of people. That might be a bigger show of, yeah, something we need to change. Like this many people cares enough to go into the street and be like, we don't approve. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, super interesting video. I mean, again, I'm glad I watched it. I've seen this video in my feed for a while, and man, that was worth watching. Very, very interesting. It's very interesting over like the last few years. I've been watching so many videos of like the history of the last 200 years or so, like, you know, Napoleonic Wars. So like the 1790s to now. And I've watched so much stuff out of order that I'm like filling pieces, you know. I watched so much stuff about like Japan in World War II and toward the end of it. But then I never really know much about Japan in between that and then the 80s, which I know a bit, like the boom, economic boom. So I guess it's really interesting to have more context like this. Great video, really great channel. Really small channel too, only 100,000 subs. Super interesting video. That was a blast. That was a blast.